I think it's a great idea for me to put my house in a trust for my kids. Well, let's talk about that in the next Wealth and Whiskey video. Welcome to Wealth and Whiskey. I'm Roger Kiger. I've been a financial planner for over 30 years, helping people build wealth and protect their legacies. Wealth and Whiskey is about sharing ideas and concepts that some folks might feel uncomfortable about. That's why we call it Aged and Unfiltered, because most of us are aged and this is fairly unfiltered. This week we need to talk about some common mistakes that clients make that they can't undo, right? We don't want you to get into something and go, oh crap. That's why we call these oh crap moments. Now let me give you my disclaimer that says, I'm not an attorney, I don't play one on TV. If you need legal advice, please consult an attorney, specifically an estate attorney, which is what we're talking about today. Because I hear a lot of people ask me, should I put my house in a trust? I want to make sure that my kids can take care of the house, or the house is maintained if something happens to me or when I die. Now, to be clear, there are some benefits to that, right? A trust will help you avoid probate, which frankly in the state of Tennessee where we live, probate's not a big deal. It's a few $100, a few months, a little bit of paperwork, and it's done. The problem with probate is it's public and everybody can see it. In states like Florida or Texas, probate's a lot more complicated, a lot more expensive, so it makes more sense in some of those states. Consult with your attorney, find out if you're in one of those states where you might need that. But the trust, by and large, does help you avoid probate. Does a trust give you some asset protection? It can. If you go into a nursing home or if you get sued, well, it depends on what type of trust, which we'll talk about in a minute. There can be some liability protection. And does a trust help you from a tax perspective? It gives you a tax benefit that you could get without the trust as well, but it can help. So the answer is, when somebody says, should I put my house in a trust? The answer is, well, it depends. So let's talk about that for a minute and go into some details that might help you answer that question. So the first problem with trust is there are two types of trust. There's revocable and then there's irrevocable. So putting your trust or assets in a revocable living trust is not a bad idea. The reason most people do that is because it does avoid probate. It doesn't really give you any asset protection, but think of the revocable living trust as another type of a will, right? Because a revocable living trust says, take my assets when I die and do this with them without going through probate. So it will either reference a will or it will have all the distribution stuff in that revocable living trust. So it's not a bad idea. They're pretty common. Here's where people go, oh no, or I didn't do this correctly. When you start a revocable living trust, fairly easy to do, it doesn't help you if you don't put assets into that trust. You have to retitle your assets in the name of that trust. Now you can do something called a pour over that says any of the assets I don't put in the trust go into that will upon my death. But again, this is why you consult an attorney. There's a lot of details that are really, really important. So either you have to title your assets in the name of the trust, investment accounts, not IRAs, but investable non-IRA accounts, and homes are usually the most common things. Maybe investment property are the most common things that are put into a revocable living trust. So, and the whole key to a revocable trust is it becomes irrevocable when you pass away, which means then you have to have, oh yeah, a trustee who's going to be the trustee? Back to, I want this house in my trust to take care of my kids. Well, one of those kids has to be a trustee. So if you don't name one of the kids as a trustee, you could name a corporate trustee, like a bank or a trust department. Well, they're going to charge a fee every year on what those assets are in that trust. And if it's not investment property or an investment account that's generating income, somebody's going to have to write a check to that corporate trustee just to manage that trust once it becomes irrevocable when you pass away. That's a challenge, right? That's a problem if there's no income to pay that trustee to manage those assets. So again, we talked about one of the kids being the trustee, corporate trustee. You can ask a friend or family member or sibling to do it. It's a lot of responsibility. It's places a hardship on somebody to say, I want you to manage these assets for my kids so that if they fight or they don't get along or one of them wants to sell the house, you have to decide. That's a lot to ask. I've seen it many, many times. There's a lot of family members or friends that are willing to do that. It's a difficult ask because the whole reason you would put it in a trust to start with is if the kids don't get along, and if there are 2 or 3 kids that now own a house together, they got to figure out what to do with it. So you can determine that in the trust. You can decide some of those things. But more often than not, one kid wants to sell their piece of the house. One kid wants to own the whole house. So somebody's got to go borrow money to buy the other one out. And you can see where that gets a little bit sticky. So yes, a trust can work for some of those things. But you can see where it's problematic and makes things a little bit challenging for whoever the trustee is, especially if the trustee is one of your children. Now they've got to deal with all that stuff on their own. So here's a couple things I would say please don't do, is don't go online and buy a trust kit. They're online all over the place. Create your trust in 20 minutes. I feel like there's a whole lot more that needs to go into that than just filling in the blanks, because this is going to live in perpetuity until you pass away, and then it becomes irrevocable, and then you can't take it out, right? So this is the oh crap moment going, oh, my parents put this in a trust and I can't get it out of there. That can be a problem, right? Especially if you're depending on who the corporate trustee is or the kids are a trust. You can see how that gets really confusing. It gets really expensive, and it doesn't always help manage that asset for those kids who are the beneficiaries. So I would say contact your attorney, and the right question is, do I need the trust? Because in a lot of states, you can solve that problem by just adding your kids to the deed. So that when you pass away, the kids are going to own the house collectively. There's still 2 or 3 or 4 of them. They still have to figure out what to do with it, but they don't have the added challenge of dealing with all the trust stuff that comes along with that. Maybe that's the easiest way to do that. And if they're on the deed, that house won't go through probate because they're a joint owner. It'll just transfer to them automatically. So maybe there are simpler ways to do what you're trying to do without putting it in a trust. Revocable trusts are good things. They avoid probate. They provide some asset protection. They help with a step-up in basis. Those are all good things. But make sure you really, really need that level of infrastructure and administration before you go down the path of setting all that up, just so you can deal with that, or your kids have to deal with it at some point in the future. It's really difficult to unwind those things once you set them up. So remember, the details really, really matter. And if you don't have the time or the inclination or the willingness to go deal with that stuff, ask somebody for advice, ask for help. Let an estate planning attorney help you figure that stuff out, right? Hope this has been helpful. Glad to answer any questions, but there's a lot more to this than what we covered in just a few minutes. So please consult some professionals and get some help with those types of questions. And as always, if we can help you, glad glad to assist wherever we can. You can start by downloading the Legacy Blueprint in the link below. I'm Roger Kiger. Please like and share our channel. We'd love for you to not miss any of our videos, and we hope we'll see you again soon. Thanks, and cheers.